Now, fun fact. So there's this thing in the scriptures, when you're studying the scriptures, they have this thing called the law of first mention. And so when it comes to love, and we're trying to get a picture of how the scriptures speak of love, and this can be done with several other topics as well. But for specifically for love, when we think about how the Bible uses the word, how it's defined in specific context, there's this thing called the law of first mention. And we find that love is first mentioned in the scriptures in the book of Genesis. And what this law of first mention says is that the first time God mentions a concept, word, phrase, or pattern in a text, it establishes a foundational precedent that continues true throughout the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Right? This precedent is just it's just something that it's a guide. It's something that sets an example for things to follow. And so what we find with love is that in Genesis chapter 22 and verse 2, we see how, you know what? I didn't think I was going to read it, but let's just see what it says. I already got it right here. Genesis chapter 2, it says, "Now it came to pass," verse 1, "after these things, that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, God, take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love." First mention of love. Now pay attention to what follows the mention of that word. "And go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." Think about that. And what we have in verse 3, it says, Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey, took two of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, which at this point is a young man. He is not a child who doesn't have understanding. At this point, he's a young man. And once they gather up the wood and they're saddling the donkeys and the servants are coming, he knows exactly what is happening at the moment. He doesn't know that it's him, but he knows that they're going in and preparing for a sacrifice. He's aware of this, right? Side note, kind of not going to go on that rabbit trail, but that is the first mention of love, and it has to do with sacrifice. And I should have mentioned this before I read John 3:16, because now we read that, we say, okay, love, sacrifice. And then we get to John 3:16 in the New Testament, and what we see love and we see sacrifice as an example. Now, obviously, these two passages of scriptures we Christians believe are related. Where in that passage in Genesis, God is showing Abraham what he is planning to do. And a quick note, I know some people have issues with this Genesis 22 event. Like, oh, why would God ask Abraham to go and sacrifice his son? Why would he do that? But yeah. There's a saying, it's like, you miss the forest for the trees. You're totally missing what is happening in this section of the scriptures. God is not, for whatever reason, telling Abraham, go and sacrifice your son so I can know whether or not you love me. That's not it at all. Think about it. That's inconsistent with what we believe about God in the Bible. We believe God is all-knowing, right? We believe God is very intentional in what he does. So at this point, you can't imagine that God does not know that Abraham loves him. I believe what God is doing is God is wanting to teach Abraham something. God is wanting to show Abraham what is in his own heart, but that's just my opinion. I mean, hey, leave a comment. Let me know what you think about that right there. You know, I'm not going to go into that. That's not the purpose of the show. Maybe we might get into it at some other point. But the law first mentioned, right? We see love, we see sacrifice. John 3:16. We see love and we see sacrifice. And for parents, that's exactly what our parenting is. it is largely sacrifice. And I know if 100% of you can really uh, 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 get with that. I know y'all can relate with that. I know you understand exactly what I'm saying. Parenting is 100% sacrifice. We sacrifice for our kids, right? For their physical needs. We want to provide for them, right? We want to protect them. But remember, I said, love is so much more than that. Parenting is so much more than that. So yes, it is. I think that's an aspect of parenting that's really easy for us. It's easy for us to sacrifice for their physical needs. But we must also sacrifice for their emotional needs. And I'm going to get into that. The CPA is going to basically explain that, give you some keys and things, or you might already know, right? So love is a sacrifice. Parenting is a sacrifice. Again, parents, we must provide so much more than just for their physical needs, but we must provide also for their emotional and spiritual needs so that they can grow up to be whole adults, so that they can be able, fully functional adults. It's very important. We cannot drop the ball on this. We cannot. And we must sacrifice and do what we must do daily to get there and to do that. And that's why I'm inviting you all with me on this journey. I mean, drop a like for that. You know what I mean? Like, we must do it. And I've learned that, and I've come to that. And now I know that I must do it. I must sacrifice, right? So let's get into this. CPA. And what I did was I broke down it. I used this abbreviation and I broke it down into things that we must do. The C would be consistent or consistency. The P would be presence, being present. And the A would be attention or attentiveness, being aware. So you have the C as consistency, the P as presence, and the A as attention. Let's just say attention, right? Being aware, being attentive. But what would it mean for us to be truly there? And I know when speaking about being there, I know for men it's different. For the most part, for men, in America, the men has been the breadwinner, right? The men has been the one to go out and work, and mom, for the most part, has been at home. So I would say for men, like, how would that work itself out? Because, we're working. A lot of us have physical jobs, technical jobs. And fun facts. One thing I've learned too is, like, thinking actually uses more energy than anything, right? And I might be jacking that up a little bit, but your brain uses energy like crazy. So if you have a job that's both mental and physical, at the end of that day, you're shot. Totally understand it, right? You're shot. And so it's a fight for us to really be there, but we must. So for the first, without getting into the P of it, the first letter of the abbreviation is C, consistent. We must be consistent. And what does it mean to be consistent? And what does it look like to be consistent? Now, I would say this. This is not something that's general. This is not something that looks the same for everyone. For these, I would say, like, these are relative. These are going to be very specific to the family, to the person. Consistency for us all, it's not going to look the same. It's going to look very different because our work schedules are going to be different. Even the activities we do, right? A lot of people have their kids in activities, so the activities are going to be different. So consistency for you is going to be different. Even our routines at home are different. So consistency, though key, is going to look different for everyone. So, we all have to kind of work around what our schedule is, uh, uh, what our lives are like, and find places where we can make this a thing in our life. Consistency is very important, very important. Okay, now let's just move on, right? Because what I found was when I thought about this, when I thought about consistency, when I thought about presence, when I thought about attention or attentiveness, I saw how they worked together, and they do not stand alone in this context with what I'm talking about, being parents who are there, right? Consistent, present, right? And attentive. They work together. So there has to be a workaround with consistency according to what our schedule is, but we must be consistent. So with the P, we must be present, right? Man, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. Yeah, let me give you an example of what I'm saying when I say consistency. An example, and also so you can see the result of what I'm saying. So, when I was writing this, I thought about, a baby who is just beginning their life, right? Just beginning to learn. They're recognizing faces, and they're just getting used to living. And so, let's say, for instance, right, there's something that mom or dad or whomever in the family does that tickles them or makes them laugh, right? It's like they're learning how to laugh now. And it could be anything, right? It can be them touching your face, maybe your lips, maybe your nose, and you do something, right? Or it can be you making a noise or looking at an object or something, whatever it is, right? They learn that when they do something, you do something, and it makes them laugh or it tickles them, right? And they learn this fairly quickly. So I guess one simple example would be them touching your lips. It's like you holding them in front of you, they touch your lips, you do whatever you do, and they laugh. And then they do it again. And then they do it again. And then they do it again. And it brings them joy. It brings them happiness, right? That's their dopamine hit. Think about that. For me, when I thought about it, that's something that's extremely profound. The fact that a baby at that age, just coming into the world and they're learning, but they know enough to think to themselves, if I repeat this, then I will receive. I think there's wisdom in that. Think about that. Right? And for me, I thought about it. I'm like, snap. So if babies at that young age can learn to repeat an action for amusement, then why would we think somehow or another, as our kids grow in age, that would change? When there is something that we do that encourages them, that lifts them up, that helps them to feel secure, that helps them to feel love, why wouldn't we repeat that consistently? Yes, right? Yes, we have to discipline. Yes, we have to teach. Life gets crazy. But why can't we remember those things and do them consistently? It's just a question. And so that it's crazy. It's crazy because it's that repeated, consistent action that is going to have the most effect in their lives. Like, this is a huge lesson that I've learned. And it wasn't an easy lesson. It was a hard lesson to learn. I don't like to think that I'm hard-headed, but I think that I'm hard-headed. It was a hard lesson to learn. And which is why I'm sharing it with you. And I want you all to think about this now. Prayerfully, maybe it's one of you are new to parenting that, that's listening to this. And hopefully I would market the video in the right way so it can get to you. But think about that now. Being a new parent, you would want to repeat those things that are going to fill, encourage, uplift, and build your kids. And there are times when the right type of discipline would do that. So discipline is not off the table. But we must love. Paul says, and speaking in context of a congregation and believers being together, he speaks of it as being the greatest thing. He said, now abide faith, hope, love. But the greatest of these, at the end of 1 Corinthians 13, is love. Yes, for life, the greatest of these things is love. Right? But we must be consistent. And I believe that principle of consistency also applies to other relationships, like marriages. Right? Being consistent in your marriage, being consistent in your communication, being consistent in how you listen and hear, right? Yeah. It's very important. Very important. Don't want to get too far off under that, but this leads right into the next one. If you're going to be consistent, you have to be present, right? But what does that mean? Is being present just simply being a body in the building, filling space, right? Are we just filling space? Is it good enough that I'm somewhere in the house, right? I'm home. They can come to me anytime they want. Is that good enough? Just asking a question. But the crazy thing about being present, you cannot be present without being aware. You have to be attentive. You have to be paying attention to what is happening around you. And there's no excuse. And remember I said in a few minutes ago, some of us have mental and physical jobs, right? And so we're done when we get home, but there's no excuse. If you're going to be present, you have to be aware. You have to pay attention. Even after a long day, even after a long, stressful day, there's no excuse. We must be present and aware. And remember, love sacrifices, that law first mentioned. So you're present, you're aware, you're tired, but you love. And so you sacrifice. Right? Remember that. And remember as well, when you're tired, you're spent, remember that love sacrifices. It's not rude. It's not self-serving. It bears all things. It believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. When I think about the enduring all things, man, what comes to mind is Jesus when he's in the Garden of Gethsemane in Matthew 26. And he's praying to the Father. It's also in Luke chapter 22 as well. And he's praying to the Father. And what he says to the Father was, if this cup can pass me, but not my will, but yours be done. Right? He sought the sacrifice for the greater good. And I believe that the cross is like that's probably the best example of that, for the greater good. But he did it. And in Hebrews 12, verse 2, we find that he did it, despising the shame, because he saw what the end of that would be. Think about that. Think about that in light of parenting. Doing what you do as sacrifice in love because you see what the end of it would be. That's where I am, and that's kind of where my thinking is. I want you all to come along with me. I mean, Hebrews literally says, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame because it was shameful. That was a shameful way to be executed. Very shameful. And what's crazy, and I know many of you might already know this, but what he suffered was excruciating. Right? Even that word, ex, out of, off of, cruce, right? Cruce, the cross. So the word we use to describe something that is intensely painful and mentally agonizing. All right, check this out. It's physically painful and mentally agonizing, excruciating. Still, Jesus endured it for the joy that was set before him. So we're home after a long day of the physical and mental agonizing. We must endure and sacrifice for the joy set before us, knowing what the end of that would be. Right? And so getting back into it, being present, we must also be aware. So being aware, we must be attentive. Why? Why must I be attentive? Why can't I just be there? How else would you see when their countenance is down? How else would you see when they're feeling away? How else could you know that they're in need of our presence and attention? I mean, you could just be a body. You can be in your own space, doing your own thing. How else would you know? Unless you're there, you're attentive, you're aware. So we must not only be filling physical spaces, but we must be intentionally in a moment where there is something needed that we can provide. I'm going to say that again. We must be intentionally in a moment where there is something needed that we can provide. Yes. And guess what? We must do this consistently. We must be consistent in being present and attentive. And we must do it all in love because it's a sacrifice. And especially for Christians and believers who are listening to this, right? Like, and being like Jesus, we do it for the joy set before us. We die daily, despising the shame in the same way. Right? Now, here are for practical. Yeah, show is already going long. This is going to be in several parts, people. Several parts. I'm not going to put it all out in one. I'm going to cut it up, have it in several parts. But here are some practical things you can do. As a family, you can eat dinner together. You can spend moments before bed together, talking about your day, how your day was. You can even eat breakfast together if you're a family who are all up at the same time. eat breakfast together. You can also set aside time during the week, during the weekends, to spend at least a couple of hours together, right? Right. But you must be intentional about this. This is specific time set aside for that, and nothing comes in the way of it. Now, obviously, there will be emergencies, but it has to be an emergency. Nothing should come in the way. And I think that when you're intentional about setting aside that time, I think that is one thing that particularly speaks the loudest, because I think it sends the message that the family is important, that what you're doing is important. Nothing else comes before this. We need to do this. Let's do it. Right. And if you do this consistently, it can become a family tradition. It can be something that your kids will never forget. It can also be something that your kids will also do when they get of age and have children. So when you're consistently present and aware, Lord knows where that would go. Right? So remember, right? The key to success is persistence, keeping at it. And we'll get there. We'll get there. And I want to leave you on this. Being a positive influence in your child's life requires you to be consistent in your actions, present in the moments that matter, right? Being there and attentive to their needs and emotions. And there is so much to unpack there. I know that there's just so much to unpack there, but that's for another time. Here it's just attentive to their needs and emotion. And consistency builds trust. Presence fosters connection. And attention helps you understand and guide them effectively. How could you if you don't know? You must pay attention. And together, these qualities create a strong foundation for your child's growth and development. Think about that. And I think I'll end it there. Hey, I want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you agree, disagree with, what spoke to you. But thanks for watching. I mean, I appreciate each and every one of you. If you want to support the channel, hit the like button. Tell a friend to tune in. Share the video. But overall, remember, consistency, presence, and awareness or attentiveness. And what binds all of these together is love. For the joy set before you. And remember, love is sacrifice, that law first mentioned. And the show is long enough, man. I could have got deeper into a lot of things, but I wanted to kind of move on and flush out what I was thinking and what I was wanting to share. But that's it. Doulos in the building. What's on your mind? Let me know. Deuces.